Greetings and welcome to the Bermuda Triangle of the Little Bighorn. Sometimes the Battle of the Little Bighorn seems like a sea of mysteries, and like the sea, it does not give up its own easily. But recent advances in Little Bighorn studies have enabled us to answer questions that baffled students of the battle as little as a decade ago. I'm Bruce Brown, and I'm the author of 100 Voices from the Little Bighorn. 100 Voices revolutionized Little Bighorn studies by collecting virtually the entire eyewitness record of the battle in one place for the first time and making it all globally searchable. So please, come with me now as we examine some of the flotsam thrown on the shore in Bruce Brown's Mysteries of the Little Bighorn. Little Bighorn Mystery Number 4. Question: who were the Suicide Boys? Answer: an unusual feature of the Battle of the Little Bighorn was the presence of a cadre of suicide warriors, all children, embedded in both the Sioux and Cheyenne forces. They were called the Suicide Boys, and Cheyenne warrior Dog said that there were also a few girls among the suicide warriors that day as well. Northern Cheyenne chronicler John Stands in Timber suggested that the presence of the Suicide Boys in the Custer Fight and their absence from the Reno fight was what made the difference in the way the two turned out. Here is John Stands in Timber's account of how the Suicide Boys came to be a part of the Battle of the Little Bighorn. John Stands in Timber said, "In the meantime, there was some excitement in the camp. Some of the Sioux boys had just announced that they were taking the suicide vow, and others were putting on a dance for them at the end of the camp. This meant that they were throwing their lives away. They would fight till they were killed in the next battle. The Cheyenne had originated the suicide vow. Then the Sioux learned it from them, and they called this dance put on to announce it dying dancing." They did not remember how many took part and never thought of counting them, but Spotted Elk said later that there were not more than 20 suicide boys. They remembered the Cheyenne boys who were dancing: Little Whirlwind, Cut Belly, Closed Hand, and Noisy Walking. The next day they were all killed. None of them knew for sure that night that the soldiers were coming the next day. They were just suspicious. The next morning, the Indians held a parade for the boys who had been in the suicide dance the night before. Different ones told me about it. One was my grandmother, Twin Woman, the wife of Lame White Man, the only Cheyenne chief who was killed in the battle. It was customary to put on such a parade after a suicide dance. The boys went in front, with an old man on either side announcing to the public to look close at these boys. They would never see them come back after the next battle. They paraded down through the Cheyenne camp on the inside and back on the outside, and then they returned to their own village. While the parade was still going on, 3 boys went down to the river to swim: William Yellow Robe, Charles Head Swift, and Wandering Medicine. They were down there in the water when they heard a lot of noise and thought the parade had just broken up. Some riders in war clothes came along the bank yelling and shouting. Then somebody hollered at them, "The camp is attacked by soldiers." John Stands in Timber went on to describe how the Suicide Boys were deployed tactically during the battle. Before long, some of the Sioux criers came along behind the line calling in the Sioux language to get ready and watch out for the Suicide Boys. They said they were getting ready down below to charge together from the river, and when they came in, all the Indians up above should jump up for hand-to-hand fighting. That way the soldiers would not have a chance to shoot, but be crowded from both sides. So the Suicide Boys were the last Indians to enter the fight. Wolftooth said that they were really watching for them, and at last they rode out down below. They galloped up to the level ground near where the museum is now. Some turned and stampeded the gray horses of the soldiers. By then they were mostly loose, the ones that had not been shot. The rest charged right in at the place where the soldiers were making their stand, and the others followed them as soon as they got the horses away. The Suicide Boys started the hand-to-hand fighting, and all of them were killed or mortally wounded. When the soldiers started shooting at them, the Indians above with Wolftooth came in from the other side. Then there was no time for them to aim or anything. The Indians were right behind and among them. Some started to run the edge under the top of the ridge, and for a distance they scattered, some going on one side and some the other. But they were all killed before they got far. After the Suicide Boys came in, it didn't take long. Half an hour, perhaps. Many have agreed with what Wolftooth said, that if it had not been for the Suicide Boys, it might have ended the way it did at the Reno fight. There the Indians all stayed back and fought. No Suicide Boys jumped in to begin the hand-to-hand fight. The Custer fight was different because those boys went in that way, and it was their rule to be killed. Northern Cheyenne warrior Wooden Leg witnessed the subsequent death of one of these Cheyenne Suicide Boys, Noisy Walking. He remembered how after sunset, when the battle was over, he sought out his wounded friend. Wooden Leg said he was lying on a ground bed of buffalo robes under a willow dome shelter. His father, White Bull, was with him. His mother sat just outside the entrance. I asked my friend, "How are you?" He replied, "Good, only I want water." I did not know what else to say, but I wanted him to know that I was his friend and willing to do whatever I could for him. 19th century American troops had certainly never seen anything before like these adolescent kamikazes on horseback, but the suicide warrior tactic will be immediately recognizable to 21st century Americans in the age of Islamic terror. Although few, the Suicide Boys exerted an influence disproportionate to their numbers, essentially functioning as a stealth corps of shock troops. A further indication of the impact of the Suicide Boys is the fact that two of the possible Custer kill stories in Who Killed Custer involve members of the Suicide Boys.